Valentine's Day was always my favorite time of year. The anticipation, the excitement, the promise of something special. It always felt like the universe conspired to make everything perfect. I had just started dating Max, and this year I was beyond excited to celebrate. Max was kind, charming, and always made me laugh. Everything about him seemed perfect, and he promised to make our first Valentine's Day unforgettable. The evening began like any other romantic date: flowers, dinner at a fancy restaurant, and the promise of an unforgettable night. But as we were wrapping up the night and heading to his car, I noticed something strange. A man was standing across the street watching us. At first I shrugged it off, but something in my gut told me it wasn't normal. Max seemed oblivious, his smile wide as we walked toward his car, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The man didn't move as we got in the car, and as we drove off, I caught a glimpse of him in the rearview mirror, still standing there, his eyes fixed on us. It was a moment of discomfort, but I convinced myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. After all, it was a busy night, Valentine's Day after all. But things didn't stop there. Over the next few days, strange things started happening. Max had dropped me off at my apartment, and when I went inside, I noticed my front door was slightly ajar. I wasn't sure if I had left it open or if I had just forgotten to lock it, but a chill ran down my spine. Inside, everything was as it should be, but something felt off. It wasn't until I checked my phone later that evening that I saw the first message. The message was short and simple. "I see you. I'll be watching." I froze. I'd never received a message like that before. It was clear it was meant for me, but who could have sent it? The phone number wasn't one I recognized. I tried to shrug it off, but the pit in my stomach grew heavier as I tried to convince myself that it was nothing. But then I remembered the man from earlier, the one watching us across the street. I called Max immediately, but when I tried to explain, he brushed it off as nothing more than a prank. But I knew something was wrong. I didn't feel safe anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing the stranger's face. The feeling of being watched hadn't gone away, and it was starting to consume me. Just as I began to drift off, my phone buzzed again. This time, the message was even more chilling. "You can't hide from me. I know where you live." I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. Whoever was doing this wasn't going to stop. It wasn't a prank anymore. The next few days felt like a blur. I couldn't focus on anything. Work, school, even my favorite TV shows. It all felt so distant. My mind kept racing, constantly replaying that eerie message and the image of the man watching us from across the street. Max tried to comfort me, but I could tell he didn't understand. He kept reassuring me that it was just some sick joke, that nothing was wrong, but deep down, I knew something much darker was happening. That Friday evening, I returned home after a long day, hoping to find a sense of normalcy. I was exhausted, both physically and mentally, and all I wanted was to relax. But when I got to my door, I froze. The lock had been tampered with. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned the handle slowly. The door creaked open, but nothing seemed out of place. I stepped inside, scanning every corner, every shadow in the room. It all looked the same, but something felt wrong. I could hear the faintest sound, like a soft scrape, coming from the other room. I tiptoed toward the sound, my breath shallow, my pulse racing, and then, just as I turned the corner into the living room, I saw it. A single rose was lying on the coffee table, a red ribbon tied around it. I hadn't ordered it. It wasn't from Max. There was no card, no note, just the rose, a symbol of the kind of affection I didn't want. My phone buzzed again. I jumped. This time the message was accompanied by a photo, my front door slightly ajar. It had been taken earlier that day while I was at work. Whoever was doing this had been watching me, had been inside my apartment. "I know everything about you. Don't run, you can't escape me." Panic surged through me. I called Max again, and this time his tone was more serious. He told me to lock all the doors and windows and not go anywhere alone, but the damage was already done. I could feel eyes on me constantly. hear the faint creak of a floorboard, the rustling of the blinds. The terror was real, and it was growing. That night, I barely slept. Every sound made my heart race. I kept the lights on and the doors locked, but still, it felt like someone was inside my apartment. I kept checking the locks, the windows, making sure everything was secure, but every time I did, I felt a new sense of dread. Around 3 a.m., I heard something that made my blood run cold. A soft knock on the window. I dared not move, not even to look. The knock came again, louder this time, and I could feel it in my bones. Whoever it was, they weren't going to stop. I could hear my breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps as the knocking persisted, growing more insistent. I was paralyzed, unable to move, unable to breathe. I'm right outside, and I'm not leaving. Not until your mind. The voice, low, gravelly, echoed through my mind, and I knew it wasn't a dream. Whoever was out there was real. They were waiting. I spent the rest of the night huddled under my blankets, my body trembling, praying that I wouldn't hear the knock again. But as the hours stretched on, it didn't stop. The sound was always there, faint but persistent. When morning finally came, I could hardly believe I had survived the night. Max came over first thing, his face pale as he saw how terrified I was. I showed him the messages, the rose, and the photo of my door. He didn't know what to say. He kept telling me that we should go to the police, but I wasn't sure it would even help. This person knew too much about me. They were always one step ahead, always watching, always waiting. I stayed with Max that day, not wanting to be alone. He insisted that I come over to his place, but I refused. I couldn't escape the feeling that wherever I went, the stalker would follow. But the tension was unbearable. I felt like I was living in a constant state of panic. My phone buzzed again, but this time, I didn't even want to look. I was too afraid. But I had to know, so I opened it. "I'm outside, you can't hide anymore." I looked out the window and nearly fainted. There, across the street, was the man. He was standing still, staring directly at me. His face was obscured by shadows, but I knew it was him. My heart stopped. He wasn't just some random person anymore. He was obsessed, and he wasn't going away. The doorbell rang, and my blood went cold. I didn't dare answer it. I just stood there, my back pressed against the wall, hoping against hope that he wouldn't try to force his way in. Then, the phone rang. It was a private number. I hesitated before answering, but I knew it had to be him. "You can't escape me," the voice said, so low and menacing I could feel it vibrating through my bones. "I'll always find you." I slammed the phone down, my breathing erratic. Max was standing beside me, trying to get me to calm down, but I couldn't. I felt trapped. The walls were closing in, and then, just as quickly as the panic had come, it shifted. A new, chilling feeling settled in, the calm before the storm. I looked outside again, but this time, he was gone. I felt my heart slow for the first time in days, but the relief was short-lived. Max checked my phone and noticed something strange. There was a new message. This time, there was no text, only a picture, a photo of my bedroom taken from the outside. I turned to Max, my eyes wide with terror. He looked at the photo, his face pale, before pulling me toward the door. But it was too late. The man had gotten too close to everything I loved. I could feel him watching me even now, and that was the worst part of all, knowing that even if I ran, he would always be there, watching. Valentine's Day had always been a day for love and celebration, or so I thought. My boyfriend, Chris, and I had been together for a little over a year. He wasn't the romantic type, and that was perfectly fine with me. We'd planned to spend the day just like any other. Dinner, a movie, and some quiet time together. But that was before things took an unexpected turn. It started the night before Valentine's Day. Chris had been acting a little off, distant even. He wasn't texting me like usual, and when we did talk on the phone, he seemed distracted. I chalked it up to him being busy with work. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He didn't even ask me what I wanted for Valentine's Day, which was unlike him. The morning of February 14th came, and I was getting ready to meet him for lunch. My phone buzzed as I was applying my makeup. It was a text from Chris. "I've got a surprise for you later. Be ready at 7 p.m. Don't make any plans." I couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and anxiety. The surprise sounded sweet, but it also felt a little too mysterious for comfort. What was going on? Was he planning something special, or was this just a ploy to throw me off guard? I spent the rest of the day trying to focus on my work, but I couldn't stop thinking about what was coming that night. At 7 p.m. sharp, my doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Chris standing there with a bouquet of roses. It was sweet, but I couldn't ignore the weird, almost eerie look in his eyes. He was smiling, but there was something not quite right about it. "Happy Valentine's Day," he said, handing me the flowers. His voice was softer than usual, and I couldn't put my finger on why, but it made my stomach churn. We went out for dinner, and as the night wore on, I noticed his behavior becoming even more strange. He kept staring at me in a way that made me uncomfortable. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe he was just trying to be romantic, but there was something in his eyes that made me nervous. It wasn't love, it was more like an obsession. After dinner, he drove me back to my apartment, but instead of saying goodbye, he invited me up to his place. "I've got something to show you," he said, his voice low, almost urgent. I hesitated. I wasn't sure what I expected, but I certainly didn't expect the strange, heavy feeling that settled in my chest. Still, I agreed, wanting to know what was going on. We arrived at Chris's apartment, and the moment I stepped inside, I felt an odd sense of discomfort. The place looked different, cleaner, more polished than usual. Chris had always been laid back about tidying up, so this change in the environment immediately set me on edge. The lighting was dim, casting long shadows across the walls. There was no music playing, no warmth to the atmosphere, just the quiet hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. "Come in, I have something for you," Chris said, his tone almost too calm. I followed him down the hallway toward his bedroom, but as we passed a door I'd never noticed before, he suddenly stopped. He gave me a strange look, one that I couldn't decipher, and then he opened the door. It wasn't his bedroom. It was a small, dark room at the end of the hall that I'd never seen before. The door creaked as it opened, and the smell of dust and stale air hit me. The room was bare except for a single chair, positioned in the middle of the floor, and a large mirror on the wall across from it. I froze in the doorway, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. There was something haunting about the room, something unnerving about the stillness that filled the space. "What is this place?" I asked, my voice shaky, unsure if I really wanted to know. Chris turned and gave me a smile, but it wasn't the smile I was used to. His lips curled unnaturally and his eyes were dark, almost hollow. This is where I planned the surprise," he said softly, his eyes never leaving mine. "I wanted it to be perfect." I swallowed hard, a lump forming in my throat. The entire situation felt wrong, like I was trapped in a nightmare and couldn't wake up. I stepped back slightly, feeling the urge to leave, but Chris grabbed my wrist gently and pulled me inside. "Sit," he instructed, pointing to the chair in the center of the room. "I have something to show you." I didn't want to sit, but there was something in his voice, something almost hypnotic, that made my body obey. I sat down, my heart pounding in my chest, my eyes darting around the small room. The mirror across from me was strangely unsettling, but I couldn't take my eyes off of it. Something about the way it reflected the dim light made it feel like it was alive, watching me. Chris stood behind me for a moment, his presence looming over me. I heard him rummaging through something, and when he turned around, he was holding a small velvet box, the kind you would keep a ring in. My stomach sank. I had no idea what was happening, but I knew it wasn't good. My breath quickened. "Chris, what is this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He knelt down in front of me and opened the box, but inside wasn't a ring. It was a photograph. A photograph of me, sitting in that very chair, looking terrified. I recoiled, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a gasp. The photograph was taken in that room, the very room I was sitting in. But the picture was old, faded, and the chair looked different, worn. In the photo, I was alone, my face frozen in a silent scream. I could see the mirror in the background, but something was off. It was as though there was someone standing behind me in the reflection, but no one was there when I looked over my shoulder. This is insane, I breathed, my voice shaking. Chris didn't respond. He just stared at the photo, his eyes glazing over. "I've been planning this for a while," he said, almost absent-mindedly. "It's the perfect proposal, you and me. Forever." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. The whole night was starting to piece together in my head, but I still didn't want to believe it. How long had he been watching me? How long had he been planning this? And why did I feel like he knew me better than I knew myself? The chill in the room intensified, and I felt the walls closing in on me. My heart pounded, each beat echoing in my ears as I stared at the photo in Chris's hands. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs felt like they were made of stone. I couldn't move. "You've been planning this? How?" I managed to croak, my voice barely audible. "How did you even get that photo?" Chris finally looked up from the picture, his gaze intense, like he was searching for something in my eyes. "I told you," he said softly. "This has been a long time coming. We were meant to be together. Always." A sickening realization washed over me. I was trapped. I had no idea what was going on, but I knew that whatever this was, it wasn't love. It wasn't a proposal. It was something far darker. "Chris, stop," I said, my voice trembling. "This isn't normal. This isn't healthy." He ignored me. His fingers trembled as he placed the photo back in the velvet box and snapped it shut. For a moment, he just stared at it, his face unreadable. Then he turned back to me, his smile widening in a way that made my blood run cold. "I told you it was perfect. This room, everything. It's all for you," he said, his voice suddenly eerie, distant. "It's been a long time. You've always been mine. It was just a matter of time before you'd see it, too." My breath hitched. I stood up, pushing the chair back as my mind raced. Was he telling the truth? Had he really been watching me for this long? I looked at him, panic rising in my chest. "You've been stalking me," I whispered, the words escaping me in a rush. This isn't love. This is obsession. You're sick." The words seemed to snap him out of whatever trance he was in. His expression shifted, almost imperceptibly, as his eyes grew darker, colder. The smile that had been on his lips vanished. Instead, he looked at me as though I were a puzzle he couldn't quite figure out. "You don't understand," he said, his voice quiet, almost pleading. "You will, soon enough." I couldn't stay in that room anymore. I turned to leave, but as I reached for the door handle, I heard him whisper something behind me. "You can't leave. You never can." I froze, my hand hovering over the doorknob. I didn't dare turn around, but the chill that ran down my spine told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't just obsessed with me. He was controlling me, trapping me. I had no choice but to get out, to run. With a burst of adrenaline, I wrenched open the door and sprinted down the hallway. As I reached the front door, I heard him calling after me, but I didn't stop. I didn't even look back. I ran into the night, heart racing, feet pounding against the pavement. I didn't stop until I reached my apartment, my chest heaving with every breath. I locked the door behind me and collapsed against it, trying to catch my breath. My mind was spinning. I never went back to Chris's apartment after that night. I changed my number, deleted all our photos, and tried to erase every trace of him from my life. But even now, months later, I still feel him watching me sometimes, like his eyes are on me even from a distance. One night I was walking home when I saw a figure standing across the street. The figure was too far away to make out, but I knew it was him, and that's when I realized he would never let me go. I wasn't expecting anything special this Valentine's Day. I had just broken up with my longtime boyfriend a few months ago, and the idea of celebrating felt off. But then, I got the message. Want to try something different this year? Meet me at the Valentine's Day escape room. I'll be waiting. It was from an unknown number. No name, just that one cryptic message. At first, I thought it was a joke, maybe a prank from one of my friends. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was something more, something real. Curiosity got the best of me. I showed up at the address listed, a converted building that looked old, its faded brick exterior covered in vines. The entrance was dark, save for a dim light that hung above the door. I pushed it open, and a small bell chimed. A man stood behind the counter, dressed in a black shirt with a red rose pinned to his lapel. "Welcome to the Valentine's Day escape room," he said, his voice smooth, almost too calm. "Are you here for the special game?" I nodded, feeling my stomach churn with a mix of excitement and dread. "The game is simple. Get out before the clock runs out, but beware. It's not just puzzles you'll be solving tonight." I thought he was just trying to set the mood, make it seem like a themed experience. But as he handed me a small envelope, something in his eyes told me this was different. "You'll understand soon enough. Good luck." I was led into the room. It was a small, intimate space with velvet-lined walls, candles flickering on every surface, and the faint scent of roses in the air. Everything about the room screamed romance. There were strange symbols etched into the walls, and a feeling of unease settled in my stomach. I glanced around. There were two other people inside the room, a couple who looked just as confused as I felt. They had been standing near the puzzle board, whispering quietly to each other, but something felt off. The door slammed shut behind us. "Welcome to your first challenge," a voice boomed from a speaker. It was cold, mechanical. "The timer has started. Solve the puzzle before time runs out." I heard the sound of gears clicking behind the walls, and the dim red lights flickered ominously. My pulse quickened as I tried to focus on the clues in front of me, but the room felt like it was closing in. The walls seemed to shift, and the air grew thick. Something was wrong. Something wasn't right about this. We got to work immediately, trying to decode the clues. The couple and I communicated in hushed voices, as if afraid to break the eerie silence of the room. At first, the puzzles seemed harmless, just locks and riddles. But then we came across something that made my skin crawl. A framed photo on the wall. It was of the three of us, our faces grinning in the glow of the candlelight. We hadn't taken any photos. There was no way the staff had snapped this. And the picture wasn't even from the same angle as where we stood. The couple gasped, stepping back from it. One of them reached out to touch the glass, but I pulled them back. Something didn't feel right. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. We tried to ignore it and focused on the next puzzle. A locked box. It had a strange inscription on the top. "You will never leave unless you understand the true meaning of love." The voice came again, more insistent now. "Solve the puzzle or the game ends." But the clock was ticking faster, almost unnaturally so. I could feel the pressure building. The walls seemed to close in even tighter, and the air grew thick with tension. Then, without warning, the lights flickered and went out. Complete darkness surrounded us. I could hear the couple breathing heavily, the sound of their feet shuffling in the dark. Panic set in. We scrambled for the flashlight that was supposed to be on the table, but it was gone. Instead, we heard a low whisper. It wasn't from any of us. "Love is a trap you can't escape." I froze. I had no idea where the voice was coming from. It wasn't from the speaker. It was right next to me. I turned my head slowly, but saw nothing. Then, the clock started counting down faster. It was almost like the room itself was alive with something sinister. The walls began to creak. A loud, violent rumble filled the space. My pulse pounded in my ears as I scrambled for the puzzle box. Desperation clawed at my throat. I didn't know who had set this up or why we were part of this twisted game, but all I knew was that I needed to escape. I yanked at the lock, nearly breaking my nails as I fumbled with the combination. The couple was yelling now, arguing over the next steps, but their voices felt distant, like they were being swallowed by the growing tension in the room. The whispering grew louder. "You cannot leave. This is where you belong." I shook my head, trying to ignore it. The clock was almost at 0. The final piece clicked into place. I heard the lock release with a satisfying click, and the box popped open. But inside was something I never expected. A red envelope sealed shut with a wax stamp. I tore it open. Inside there was a note written in an elegant script. "You will never forget this Valentine's Day. Escape or remain." The floor beneath me shifted. The door I had entered through slammed. Suddenly the lights came back on, blinding me. The couple was gone. "Congratulations," the voice said, dripping with malice. "You are the new player." I turned around, heart in my throat. I was alone. The room was empty, except for the locked door and the envelope in my hands. I knew I had to escape, but I also knew something worse was waiting on the other side.